My parents cut me off to pay for my brother's wedding, so I built my own life. Quietly, and now they beg for help I'll never give. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and I used to believe my family was close-knit until I learned what love meant to them. Growing up, we looked perfect from the outside. My dad was the respected, hard-working man. My mom, the social butterfly everyone adored. And my brother, Nathan, the golden boy who could charm anyone in seconds. I was the quiet one. The kid who did his chores, got decent grades, and stayed out of trouble. But in my family, silence wasn't admirable. It was invisible. Every dinner felt like a ceremony dedicated to Nathan. Did you see how confident he looked during his debate? Mom would beam. Dad would nod proudly, cutting his steak. That boy's going places. I'd sit there, chewing quietly, waiting for them to ask about my robotics, competition, or my weekend project. Anything, but the conversation always flowed right past me like I wasn't even there. Nathan had this effortless way of making mediocrity look like brilliance. If he scored a B, they'd say, he's just testing the waters. If I brought home an A, they'd ask why I didn't aim for extra credit. At 14, I remember overhearing my mom tell her friend, Nathan's just like his father, strong, confident, reliable. And then there's our sweet, quiet one. She didn't mean it cruelly, but it stung. Sweet was code for forgettable, even in family photos. You could see the hierarchy, Nathan in the center, grinning like a movie star, my parents flanking him proudly, and me somewhere at the edge, half smiling, half wondering what it felt like to be seen. Back then, I told myself it didn't matter, that one day I'd do something big enough to make them notice. But I had no idea that in my family, love wasn't something you earned through effort. It was something already claimed, and I was never part of that claim. And the older I got, the more obvious that truth became. By the time I hit high school, the favoritism wasn't just emotional, it was financial too. Nathan turned 16 and got a shiny silver Honda Civic as a reward for being responsible. I remember standing in the driveway, watching him rev the engine while Mom filmed him like it was a graduation ceremony. I didn't say anything, just clutched the rag I'd been using to wash my bike, my only mode of transportation to school and my part-time job. When I asked Dad if I could get a car once I saved enough, he barely looked up from the newspaper. "Let's see if you keep your grades up first," he muttered. I did, and then some. Straight A's, perfect attendance, even volunteered at school events. But there was always a reason I wasn't ready. Nathan, on the other hand, could crash his car into a mailbox and somehow still be learning responsibility. College made things worse. When acceptance letters came in, I was over the moon, full scholarship to a state university. I proudly showed them the email, expecting maybe, finally, a smile that meant something. Mom said, "That's great, honey. You've always been so independent." And then turned to Dad. "We'll need to help Nathan with tuition since his grades won't get him much aid." Just like that, it was decided. Every dollar they'd saved for their kid's education went to Nathan's private college, while I got a pat on the back and a, "You'll figure it out. You always do." I told myself I didn't need them, that I'd work, study, and build something on my own. But deep down, it hurt. To know my hard work only made me more convenient to ignore. I thought independence would earn their respect. Instead, it made me easier to forget. And that's when I realized, being the responsible one isn't a compliment in a family that never plans to show up for you. College was survival mode. I worked the early shift at a cafe, attended classes until evening, then closed up a convenience store until midnight. I didn't complain. I was proud that I could stand on my own 2 feet. But every night walking back to my tiny apartment, I'd pass groups of students laughing together, living without counting every dollar, and I'd wonder how it felt to have parents who actually helped. Nathan, meanwhile, was living the dream. My parents called every week to tell me about his networking, his fraternity connections, his potential. One night, after a particularly long double shift, I called home just to hear a familiar voice. Mom picked up, distracted. "Oh, sweetheart. I'll call you back. We're at Nathan's dinner event." She never did. That's when I started sending money home. Small amounts at first. $50, $100 when I could. I thought maybe it'd show I wasn't a failure, that I was responsible. Mom always replied with the same half-hearted, "You shouldn't worry about us. Focus on yourself." But the tone said otherwise. Nathan doesn't need to send money. He's doing fine. By graduation, I landed my first steady job in IT. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to finally breathe. I remember calling my dad, hoping to hear, "I'm proud of you." Instead, he said, "So, when are you planning to help your brother? He's still looking for direction." That single sentence crushed me more than any insult could. I worked. I saved. I kept my head down. But the love I chased was always just out of reach, like a mirage. And the more I tried to earn their approval, the more I realized they never intended to give it. I didn't know it then, but their silence was the calm before the betrayal that would finally break me. It was a Sunday afternoon when Mom called, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Guess what? Nathan's getting married." For a second, I smiled. Despite everything, I was happy for him, or maybe just relieved to hear from her. But then she kept talking. "We're planning something big, honey. A grand wedding at the Hillcrest Banquet Hall. Oh, you should see it." Her voice sparkled like a woman announcing her own victory, not her son's milestone. When I visited home that weekend, the house looked like a planning headquarters. Fabric samples, catering brochures, guest lists scattered across the dining table. Nathan strutted around, boasting about how it's going to be the wedding of the year. His fiancée, Claire, was polite, though I could tell she was overwhelmed. Dad looked more tired than usual. I asked quietly, "Can you afford all this?" He brushed me off. "Don't worry about it. This is what parents do." Something about his tone made me uneasy. That night, while Mom was showing Claire old family photos, I overheard my aunt whispering to another relative. "They're using the leftover college savings for it. Even the account that was supposed to be for both boys." I froze. Both boys. That was the account my father had once promised would help me buy a house someday. A promise that kept me pushing through every sleepless night in college. When I confronted Mom later, she sighed. "Honey, you're doing fine on your own. Nathan needs a start in life. It's what family does. Help the one who's struggling." I felt my chest tighten. "So I get punished for not struggling enough?" She didn't answer, just turned away, muttering, "You've always been so dramatic." I went to bed that night staring at the ceiling, realizing that no matter how much I gave, my place in this family was already sold, and the price was my brother's wedding. The next morning, I couldn't shake it. I sat at the kitchen table while Mom hummed cheerfully, flipping through floral arrangements like nothing had happened. My father sipped his coffee in silence, and Nathan was bragging about the open bar. I finally spoke. "So it's true. You used my part of the savings for this wedding?" Mom froze for a moment, then sighed dramatically. "Oh, not this again. It's not your money, it's family money. We all contribute to each other's happiness." Dad didn't even look up. "You're being selfish, son. This is your brother's big moment." Selfish. That word hit me harder than I expected. I stood up, my hands trembling. I worked my way through college. I sent money home when I could. I never asked you for anything. And you still— Nathan cut in, laughing. "Come on, man. You're acting like we stole your retirement fund." Relax. That casual arrogance. It snapped something inside me. "I'm done," I said quietly. "If this is what family means to you, taking from the one who worked for everything, then I want no part of it." Mom's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone. You sound ungrateful." "Ungrateful? For what, being invisible my whole life?" I grabbed my coat and walked out. Later that night, I got a text from Dad. "Since you're choosing to distance yourself, we'll respect that. But don't come around acting like the victim." A week later, the family group chat I'd been part of for years, gone. Just deleted me like I never existed. No invitations, no calls. Not even a photo from the wedding. For the first time, I wasn't part of the family narrative. And as painful as that was, some part of me knew. It was the only way I'd ever learn who I really was without them. Still, I had no idea how much harder it would get before life finally turned around. When I walked away, I had nothing. No family, no safety net, no one checking in to see if I was even okay. The silence that followed was brutal. Birthdays came and went. Holidays, too. My phone stayed quiet except for the occasional spam call. But somewhere in that loneliness, I found a strange kind of peace. I threw myself into work. I picked up every side gig I could. Tech repairs, small freelance coding jobs, even building websites for local stores. The nights were long, the meals cheap, but every dollar earned felt mine. There was something addictive about that independence, even when it hurt. One night, while fixing a client's network, I met an older guy named Martin. He ran a small logistics firm and noticed how I solved problems quickly. "You ever thought about building your own team?" he asked. I laughed it off, but his words stuck. Over time, I started assembling a few people, freelancers like me, who wanted something better. We worked from my apartment, surviving on caffeine and ambition. 2 years later, the twist I never expected hit. Martin came back, not as a client, but as an investor. He'd been watching quietly, impressed by how I built something from scraps. "You remind me of me when I started," he said, handing me a partnership offer. That night, I sat in that same cramped apartment, staring at the contract. My family had erased me, and yet, without their approval, I'd done something they never believed I could. I built a life from nothing. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell anyone. Success felt sacred when it came from pain. But deep down, I knew one thing for sure. Silence was no longer my weakness. It was my weapon. And one day, that silence would speak louder than anything they'd ever said to me. 3 years later, my life barely resembled the wreckage I'd crawled out of. The small team I'd built grew into a full-fledged tech firm. What started in my one-bedroom apartment now occupied 2 floors of a rented office space downtown. We weren't flashy, but our results spoke for themselves. Companies that once ignored my proposals were now requesting meetings. The strangest part? I never felt the urge to brag. No Facebook updates, no family emails, no look-at-me-now moments. I stayed quiet, working, building, improving. Success wasn't about showing them. It was about proving to myself that I could exist without their validation. Still, life has a cruel sense of irony. One night, while checking old messages on social media, I saw a post from Nathan's wife, Claire. "Hard times don't last, but strong families do." The photo beneath it showed them standing in front of their home with a for sale sign behind them. The comments were flooded with sympathy. Something about Nathan losing his job, debt piling up, and them downsizing for a while. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me felt pity. Another part, one I hated to admit, felt satisfaction. The kid who was never good enough was now thriving, while the golden son was losing his shine. But even then, I didn't reach out. I couldn't, not out of hatred but self-preservation. I'd built this peace too painfully to risk it again. One evening, my business partner Martin said, "You ever think about visiting home?" I smiled faintly. "Home's not a place, Martin. It's what you build when nobody else builds with you." I thought that would be the end of it. But the universe wasn't done connecting the dots. Because just when I'd learned to live without them, fate decided to make them remember me. It was a random Tuesday evening when my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in years. I froze. My mother's name blinked on the screen. For a moment, I thought it had to be a mistake. I hadn't heard from her since the day they cut me off. I let it ring out once, twice, then answered. Her voice was shaky, tired in a way I'd never heard before. "Sweetheart," she began softly like nothing had happened. "It's been so long. How are you?" I didn't respond right away. I just listened to her breathing, the silence heavy with all the words left unsaid. Finally I said, "Why are you calling me Mom?" She hesitated. "Your father and we're in a bit of trouble. Nathan, too. Things haven't been easy. The business, well, it fell through. And your brother's marriage. It's complicated." I could hear the desperation beneath her carefully chosen words. Then came the real reason. "We were hoping maybe you could help. Just a small loan to get us through." For a moment, I almost laughed. The same people who told me I wasn't part of the family fund now needed mine. The irony was too sharp to ignore. I asked quietly, "What happened to Nathan's savings?" She sighed. "He tried starting something on his own. It didn't work out. You know how the economy is." "Of course." Nathan always had excuses. I told her I'd think about it. Her relief was instant. "Thank you, sweetheart. You've always been the dependable one." That sentence echoed in my head long after the call ended. Dependable. Not loved. Not forgiven. Just useful again. I stared out my apartment window, city lights flickering below, realizing this wasn't just a call for help. It was the universe handing me the power I never had before. And I had no idea how heavy that power would feel once I decided what to do with it. I hadn't seen my childhood home in nearly 6 years. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked smaller, like time had stolen its pride. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown, and the front porch light flickered like a weak heartbeat. For a moment, I almost felt sorry. Almost. Mom opened the door before I could knock. She looked older, exhausted, but tried to smile. "You look successful," she said, her voice trembling between admiration and guilt. Dad appeared behind her, quieter than I remembered. His once commanding posture now slouched. Inside, everything felt heavy. The air smelled like dust and regret. Nathan sat at the table, his eyes hollow. Gone was the charm that used to command every room. He barely looked at me before muttering, "Didn't think you'd actually come." Mom rushed to fill the silence. "Things have been hard. Your father co-signed a business loan for Nathan. It collapsed. We're behind on the mortgage, and your brother's struggling to find work." She avoided my eyes as she spoke, as if admitting failure was the last shred of dignity she could lose. I listened quietly, my stomach tightening. They painted a picture of desperation, each sentence wrapped in guilt-tripped nostalgia, how they did everything for family, how mistakes happen, and how family sticks together. When they finally asked for money, I didn't answer. I just looked at Nathan. He couldn't even meet my gaze. In that silence, I realized something. They didn't call because they missed me. They called because they needed me. Love had nothing to do with it. I stood up, pretending to check my phone. "I'll think about it," I said flatly. Mom's face lit with fragile hope. "You've always had such a good heart," I forced a smile. "Not as good as you remember." And as I left that night, I knew this visit wasn't closure. It was the beginning of their reckoning. Driving home, my thoughts were a storm. I kept replaying Mom's voice. Soft, pleading. The same tone she used whenever she wanted something. Every instinct screamed to help. Despite everything, they were still my parents. And Nathan, he looked broken. For years, I'd fantasized about seeing him face consequences, but standing there, it didn't feel like victory. It felt hollow. For days, I couldn't focus. Every meal tasted like guilt. Every time I looked at my bank account, I thought of that house, the one I used to call home, falling apart. Then one night, I opened an old photo album I'd kept tucked away. Pictures of me and Nathan as kids, birthday cakes, scraped knees, stupid grins. There was a time when we actually laughed together, before life taught us who the favorite was. That night, I nearly called Mom. I typed the number, thumb hovering over send. But then I remembered that text. Don't come around acting like the victim. And suddenly, the guilt twisted into anger. Where were they when I slept on couches, skipped meals, begged landlords for another week? Where was their concern then? They cut me off without hesitation, but now that they were desperate, I was family again. I deleted the number, sat in silence, breathed. That was my lowest point. Not when they abandoned me, but when I almost betrayed myself to earn back love I never truly had. By the time morning came, I knew my decision. I wasn't going to save them, not because I wanted revenge, but because saving them meant losing myself all over again. A week later, I went back, not to help, but to end it. They greeted me with rehearsed gratitude, as if the deal was already sealed. Mom even made my favorite meal, the one she used to reserve for Nathan's birthdays. I sat at the table, quiet, watching them pretend we were a family again. Finally, I set my phone down and looked at them. "Before we talk about money," I said, "I need to say something." Their smiles froze. "I've spent years wondering why I wasn't enough for you. Why every achievement I had was treated like an obligation, while Nathan's mistakes were celebrated. And when you used my savings for his wedding, that was the moment I realized I wasn't your son. I was your safety net." Dad tried to interrupt. "That's not fair." I cut him off. "Fair? You cut me off when I refused to fund your choices. You erased me from your lives. Now you're here because I have something you need." Silence filled the room. Nathan's jaw clenched. "You think you're better than us now?" I met his glare. "No, just smarter." Mom started crying, whispering, "We just need one chance to make it right." I stood up, my voice steady. "You had years of chances. I'm not here to fix what you broke." As I walked to the door, my father said softly, "You'll regret this one day." I turned back. I already did. Every day I spent trying to earn your love. And for the first time in my life, I left without looking back. They had finally lost their favorite scapegoat, and I had finally gained my freedom. Months passed. Their calls stopped. Their names no longer triggered anger, just distance. My company grew, and so did I. I moved into a quiet house near the coast. Nothing extravagant, but filled with peace. Something money couldn't buy when I lived under their roof. Sometimes, I still think about that night, the confrontation, the silence that followed. I didn't get the dramatic ending I once wanted. There was no apology big enough to fix the years I spent invisible. But I got something better. Closure. I started mentoring young people, kids like me who grew up feeling unseen, carrying wounds they couldn't name. Watching them succeed reminded me that healing isn't loud. It's in the small victories, the quiet mornings, the ability to say no without guilt. Last month, I heard through a cousin that Nathan moved out of state. My parents sold the house. I didn't feel anything, not joy, not sorrow, just peace. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting to their story. I was living mine. People say family is everything. Maybe they're right, but only when love goes both ways. I learned that blood doesn't make you family. Consistency does. I looked out at the ocean one evening and whispered to myself, they taught me that love can be conditional, but self-worth shouldn't be. And in that moment, I smiled, because the boy they ignored had finally become the man they could never break. Their silence used to haunt me. Now it's proof I survived,